Alabama State walked into the Florida relays as the team nobody was watching. Million-dollar programs, coast-to-coast recruiting pipelines, and the best collegiate track and field athletes in the country, all in the same meet. The Hornets from Montgomery had no business being mentioned in the same conversation, and for most of that day, they weren't. Then something happened on that track in Gainesville that nobody in that stadium saw coming, and by the time it was over, Alabama State had made every powerhouse program in that field look ordinary. Dadrian Bevel stood atop the triple jump podium, having just launched herself 12.84 meters through the humid Florida air. Aaliyah Williams had just shattered a school record that had stood for years, crossing the finish line of the 1,500 meters in 4 minutes and 31.94 seconds. Personal bests were falling left and right across the Alabama State roster. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Florida Relays attracts the absolute best programs in collegiate track and field, schools that recruit nationally and spend accordingly. Yet somehow, the Hornets had just delivered the performance of their lives when it mattered most. Alabama State University's track and field program has always been the definition of doing more with less. While powerhouse programs recruit from the biggest high schools in Texas and California, the Hornets find diamonds in the rough from small towns across Alabama. Their training facilities don't have the bells and whistles of major conference schools. Their recruiting budget is a fraction of what their competitors spend. But what Alabama State lacks in resources, they make up for in heart, dedication, and an unshakable belief that talent can emerge from anywhere. The coaching staff has built a culture where every athlete pushes each other to exceed their own expectations. When you walk into their practice facility in Montgomery, you don't see athletes going through the motions. You see a team that genuinely believes they belong on the same track as anyone in the country. The Florida Relays represent the ultimate test for a program like Alabama State. Held annually at the University of Florida's Percy Beard Track, this meet brings together the best collegiate and professional athletes in the sport. The competition is so fierce that simply qualifying for certain events is considered an achievement. The atmosphere is electric, with thousands of spectators and scouts watching every race, every jump, every throw. For weeks leading up to the meet, the Alabama State coaching staff knew their athletes had been training at a different level. Personal records were falling in practice. The energy around the team was different. There was a quiet confidence building that maybe, just maybe, this could be their breakthrough moment. Dadrian Bevel had been steadily improving in the triple jump throughout the indoor season. Her technique had become more refined, her approach more consistent, but even her coaches couldn't have predicted what was about to happen when she stepped into the triple jump pit at the Florida Relays. The competition field was stacked with athletes who had been jumping over 12 meters consistently. Bevel was considered a long shot to even make the finals. The atmosphere in Gainesville that day was electric. The sun was beating down on Percy Beard Track as athletes from across the nation warmed up for what would become one of the most memorable meets of the season. Alabama State's small contingent of athletes looked around at the sea of major conference warm-up gear and million-dollar training equipment. They were clearly the underdogs in every single event they had entered. But something special was brewing in the Alabama State camp. The athletes weren't intimidated by the big names and fancy uniforms around them. If anything, they seemed energized by the opportunity to prove they belonged on this stage. Their coaches had spent months preparing them not just physically, but mentally for this exact moment. When Dadrian Bevel stepped up for her first attempt in the triple jump, the stadium announcer barely mentioned her name. She was just another competitor in a field dominated by athletes from major conferences. But as she bounded down the runway, hit her marks perfectly, and soared through the air, something magical happened. The sand exploded as she landed, and when the measurement came back at 12.84 meters, the entire Alabama State section erupted. Not only had Bevel just jumped a personal best by nearly half a meter, she had moved into the number 2 spot in school history and taken the lead in one of the most competitive events of the entire meet. The triple jump pit suddenly became the center of attention as word spread that an unknown athlete from Alabama State had just thrown down a massive mark. But Bevel's heroics were just the beginning of what would become a record-breaking day for the Hornets. Across the infield, Aaliyah Williams was preparing for the 1,500 meters, an event where Alabama State had never made a serious mark at this level of competition. Williams had been training specifically for this moment, logging countless miles on the roads around Montgomery and perfecting her race strategy for months. When the gun fired for the 1,500 meters, Williams found herself in a field of seasoned distance runners from programs known for developing Olympic-caliber athletes. The early pace was honest, and Williams tucked herself into the pack, staying patient as the race developed over the first few laps. Her coaches watched nervously from the stands, knowing this was her shot to prove she belonged among the nation's best. As the race entered the final 600 meters, Williams made her move. She shifted into another gear that nobody in the field had seen coming. Her stride lengthened, her breathing stayed controlled, and she began methodically picking off runner after runner. The crowd started to take notice as this unknown athlete from Alabama State charged toward the front of the field. Coming off the final turn, Williams was in third place and closing fast on the leaders. The stadium announcer's voice began to rise as he realized something special was happening. Williams kicked again in the final 100 meters, her form staying perfect even as she reached speeds she had never maintained before. She crossed the finish line in fourth place overall, but her time of 4 minutes and 31.94 seconds had just obliterated the Alabama State school record. The celebration in the Alabama State section was unlike anything the Florida relays had seen in years. Athletes who weren't even competing that day were on their feet, screaming and hugging as Williams collapsed in exhaustion after the race of her life. The time didn't just break the school record, it destroyed it by over 10 seconds and announced to the track and field world that Alabama State was no longer content to just participate at this level. But the magic wasn't finished. Throughout the rest of the meet, Alabama State athletes continued to deliver performances that defied expectations. Caden McKyer soared 7.22 meters in the long jump, a personal best that moved him into elite territory in that event. Amaya Burrows launched the discus 44.45 meters, adding over 2 meters to her previous best throw. The sprint event saw their own breakthrough moments as Rasunek Tyler Thompson blazed to an 11.43-second 100 meters, while Wilnaya Taylor navigated the 100-meter hurdles in 13.85 seconds. Even with wind assistance, Shantaria Washington's 11.54-second 100 meters showed the depth of speed that Alabama State had been developing. As the final events of the meet concluded and the results became official, the magnitude of what Alabama State had accomplished began to sink in. They hadn't just competed with the nation's best programs, they had set the standard in multiple events. The small school from Montgomery had delivered the kind of breakthrough performance that changes the trajectory of an entire program. The impact of the Florida Relays performance extends far beyond the record books. Alabama State has announced to the collegiate track and field world that they are no longer a program to be overlooked. The recruiting landscape has changed overnight, as high school athletes across the country now see Montgomery as a destination where they can develop into elite competitors.